Hi, welcome back. It's been a really long time since I recorded any videos. I've been up to so much really in the lockdowns. So for those of you who've not been here before, I'm Maria Haley. I am the Millennial Classicist. It's been a while since I brought some YouTube videos to you because I've been organising summer schools, doing teacher assessed grades for my kids. So today I wanted to bring in a video based on some requests I've had from Hugo, one of my viewers who's emailed in. And everybody's been asking for a video really on Aristotle and the Poetics and tragedy, as well as a couple more on choruses. So I'm going to put those together for you. But what is also coming up for the new term are a few more videos, some playlists on Virgil's Aeneid and Homer's Odyssey. These are really popular texts for undergraduates but also for A-level students, and although I think the course hero starters to these texts are really good, they give like book overviews and character overviews. Actually what I'm going to do is go in by theme, so I'll really help you out if you're trying to dig a little bit deeper on these texts. Okay, so first of all today I thought we'd look at Aristotle's Poetics and using it to read Greek tragedy. So Aristotle's Poetics is a text that we go to quite a lot when we're trying to understand Greek tragedy and what makes a good Greek tragedy. Big scare mark here. People tend to read Aristotle as though he's really authoritative on the subject because he's a philosopher writing in ancient Greece. However, he's writing about 100 years after the 5th century tragedies that he's talking about. He's writing in the 300s BC, and the tragedies he's speaking about, usually the big three like Aeschylus, Sophocles or Euripides, who you might have seen on the channel before, were in the 5th century. So he's unlikely to have seen productions that those tragedians put on first hand, but might have seen productions when things were restaged later on. This means that he's seen perhaps the dialogue and the gist and the story, but it's not been produced the way it would have been done originally at the Dionysia in the 5th century. So as a source, he's a bit late. He has a lot of aesthetic ideals about what makes a really good tragedy. And if you want to understand Greek tragedy using Aristotle, the best way to do this is to try and use and understand the vocabulary he uses to explain the best tragedies. So what makes the best tragedies for Aristotle? The biggie, and the one that scholars argue about the most, is that the hero should have Hamartir. Now some people argue that Hamartir is a fatal flaw. It's a heroic fault that means that whoever is at the centre of a tragedy, is not going to do very well. Things are not going to pan out well for them. But other people argue that actually this is an error, not necessarily somebody's flaw. It's not a moral problem. It's kind of a blunder or a mishap that could happen to anybody. So there's a massive debate about what hamartia actually means. Hamartein literally means to error. So it's not necessarily a flaw in somebody's character in the way that we traditionally think. And it's a really good topic to include scholarship on if you're working towards a qualification in classics, because it's a really big topic. An example might be if you were looking at Oedipus the King, someone we've talked about before on the channel, and you can see the videos linked below. You could say that in this play, because Oedipus has accidentally or unknowingly killed his father and married his mother, his fatal flaw is ignorance. He doesn't find things out, he acts before he thinks. You could argue that. However, people would argue and might find more evidence for the fact that this is prophesied and therefore isn't really a flaw in his character and would have happened anyway. So it's an error that doesn't really present a negative judgment on Oedipus as a character. So hamartia is one of Aristotle's key points in a really good tragedy. Is what makes a tragedy tragic. Another key component to a tragic plot, or a good tragic plot according to Aristotle, is Peripatea, a reversal of fortune. And for this reason, you might have noticed already, tragedies star royal people. They star people that are aspirational, okay? They're not necessarily representing everyday people the way that 5th century comedy would have done. So we're not meeting, say, farmers or rustic people or people even living in the city of Athens. We're meeting tragic royals from a heroic past. And Aristotle says this is really important actually to the reversal of fortune we see in tragedy, because people should go from a very high standard of living to a very poor standard of living in order to make it truly tragic. So from the very high to the very low. An example of this reversal of fortune could be, think about Pentheus in Bacchae. Again, we've talked about Pentheus before, and I'll link those videos below. Pentheus is ruling Thebes when Dionysus brings his cult to Thebes. And when Pentheus refuses to take on Dionysus's cult, he is punished. So Dionysus makes sure that eventually Pentheus's mum goes into a Bacchic frenzy and rips her son apart. So this reversal of fortune is pretty abrupt, and it's from the very top to the very bottom. When you're in power, the decisions that you make have bigger consequences, and the reversal of fortune, or Peripatea, is one of the things that Aristotle says makes a really good tragedy. Another feature and a really key device that we see in 5th century tragedies is an Agnoresis. An Agnoresis is a recognition scene. So this is when the characters come to realise everything has gone wrong. It's usually the climax of the play, and in some ways it's more tragic and more pathetic than the moment where something goes wrong in itself. So I'm going to use Bacchae again as a really good example of this. In Euripides' Bacchae, and we've seen this on the Pentheus Cilix crater, which I'm going to pop on the screen now, we see, or we know, that Pentheus is ripped apart by the Maenads, by the Bacchantes. But we don't actually, or we wouldn't actually, have seen this on stage. Lots of tragic violence in the 5th century couldn't be put on stage, and it was often reported by a messenger speech. So the messenger would come on and announce what had happened, either to characters within the play or to the chorus, which really allows the audience to know more than the key characters do. So it's another way of creating dramatic irony, which we've talked about before on the channel. The recognition scene is when the key characters understand what's happened and react in a really intense and private way. So for example, the way that Agave recognises the head of Pentheus at the end of Bacchae is a good example of a recognition scene. She comes down in a frenzy from the mountains. She thinks she has the head of a lion in her hands because she's been hunting with the Bacchantes, but Cadmus is the one, her father is the one, who brings her to her senses and makes her realise that actually this is the head of Pentheus. So that is a really poignant recognition scene, or an Agnoresis, and this is the sort of thing that Aristotle praised good tragedies for. So we've had Hamartir, this idea of a flaw or error. We've had Peripatea, the reversal of fortune, and we've had an Agnoresis. And these are really key examples of what Aristotle felt made a really good tragedy. When it comes to Aristotle's favourite tragedies, he actually holds up Oedipus the King as an excellent example because of the way that it hits all of these key themes. There are layers of recognition, for example, in Oedipus the King, which I've mentioned in another video. So the Agnoresis theme is particularly strong. The reversal of fortune couldn't be worse. Oedipus has killed his father and married his mother. And the outcome, the recognition, causes Oedipus to blind himself because he doesn't want to see, realise, understand any more of what's happened. So that is one of Aristotle's favourite tragedies, actually, one that we've talked about already, and he holds that up as a great example. When it comes to Euripides, Aristotle actually describes Euripides as one of Neoteroi, one of the new poets on the scene, which is really unusual because Euripides is still a 5th century tragedian, but he's kind of been lumped in with 4th century contemporary tragedians that Aristotle talks about later on. And we can see this in the way that Euripides takes on new themes. That really deserves a video all of its own, but if you want to see how Euripides takes myth, twists it and makes it something altogether new, why don't you check out my video on Helen and Euripides as Helen. The final element of tragedy that we've not talked about yet, and might be the most, well, familiar, I suppose, from Shakespeare and English lit, is catharsis. So the feeling that you should have at the end of a tragedy when you've watched really awful things happen and you've seen it unfold and you feel like you've been emotionally kind of put through the ringer, and it should give you that sense of relief that although it's happening to others, it's not happening to you. So when you're thinking about Aristotle in Greek tragedy essays, why don't you try and read, understand these key terms and think about how they apply to the play that you're studying. Is there a reversal of fortune? Is there a key recognition scene? Is there an error, a fundamental error that's prophesied or fated? Or alternatively, does the hero have a flaw? And which do you think would be more important? And what kind of catharsis can you expect at the end? I hope that was really helpful and gave you just a brief overview and introduction to Aristotle's Poetics. It's quite a tricky text and we can perhaps trust it too much, but it's really important in the reception of Greek tragedy and the way that people have gone on to understand Greek tragedy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to keep the channel going. And if you're interested in classics and looking to stock up on stuff like stationery for the new term, why don't you go and have a look at my Redbubble store, and I'll pop the link in the description below. Thanks!